I hit the cold hardwood floor so hard the impact knocked the breath completely out of my lungs, right in the middle of our lavish Christmas Eve dinner. As I gasped for air, my vision blurred for a second. When my eyes finally focused, I looked up to see my stepfather clutching the back of the heavy mahogany chair he had just violently yanked out from beneath me. My own mother looked away and said absolutely nothing. My golden child stepsister just smirked into her crystal wine glass. That night, as they slept comfortably in their heavily mortgaged mansion, they had no idea I was quietly dismantling their entire financial empire. By Christmas morning, they would wake up to 99 missed calls and a shattered life they could never fix. I am Camille, 35 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the designated punching bag in a household obsessed with status and wealth. I work as a senior financial fraud investigator, a career my family loves to dismiss as being just a boring desk job. Before I continue this story, let me know what city or country you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members who completely underestimated your intelligence. Growing up in an upscale suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, my life was a constant display of wealth that never truly belonged to me. Our sprawling mansion with its massive columns and imported marble floors was designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the front doors. It was Christmas Eve, and the dining room was decorated like a magazine cover. The long table was draped in fine silk linens, set with gold-rimmed porcelain plates and surrounded by towering crystal centerpieces catching the light of the massive chandelier above us. The smell of honey, glazed ham, roasted winter vegetables, and expensive imported wine filled the air. It was a picture-perfect holiday scene built on a foundation of absolute cruelty. I had arrived earlier that evening dressed in a custom-tailored suit, keeping my demeanor professional and guarded. I knew better than to expect warmth from these people, but I attended these gatherings out of a lingering sense of obligation to my mother Yvonne. When it was time to eat, I walked toward the table and naturally moved to take the seat near the head of the table. It was the same seat I had occupied during the rare times I was actually invited to family dinners. I pulled the heavy mahogany chair back, smoothed my trousers, and began to lower myself. I never made it to the cushion. In a flash of aggressive movement, my stepfather Warren lunged forward. His large hands gripped the intricately carved wood of the chair back, and with a vicious jerk, he pulled it entirely out of my way. Gravity took over instantly. I crashed down onto the solid oak floor. The thud of my body hitting the wood echoed through the cavernous dining room, silencing the soft holiday music playing from the hidden speakers. Sharp pain shot up my spine and radiated through my shoulders. The shock of the fall left me momentarily paralyzed, trying to process the sheer hostility of what had just happened. I laid there for a terrifying second, staring at the intricate patterns of the Persian rug just inches from my face. The room went dead silent. No one gasped. No one rushed forward to help me up. I slowly rolled over and pushed myself up onto my elbows. Towering above me was Warren. He was a tall, imposing man of 60 who wore his expensive suits like armor. His face was twisted into a sneer of pure disgust. He did not look sorry. He looked triumphant. "Get up!" He snapped, his deep voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You do not belong here. This seat at the head of the table is for my real daughter, Brianna." He practically spat the words at me. He shoved the heavy chair toward Brianna, who was standing a few feet away, looking thoroughly entertained. She was 30 years old but still acted like a spoiled teenager entirely dependent on Warren's bank accounts. She gracefully glided over to the chair and sat down, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet with a smug, satisfied expression. I remained on the floor for another moment, gathering my breath, my chest tight with a familiar burning sensation of humiliation. I looked at Warren, expecting at least a shred of common decency, even though I knew better. Instead, he took a step closer to me, pointing a thick finger down at my face. "I have paid for your entire life since your daddy died 20 years ago." Warren growled, his voice dripping with condescension. You walk in here in your little business suits acting like you run things. You are nothing but a glorified calculator, Camille. You sit at a desk and crunch numbers for a living. Brianna just launched a massive lifestyle brand. She is building a real legacy. In this house, you need to respect the hierarchy. You are not at the top of the food chain here, and you never will be. The seat of honor is for my blood, for the people who actually contribute to the prestige of this family. Every word was designed to strip away my dignity, to remind me that in his eyes I was an outsider, a burden, a charity case he was forced to tolerate because he married my mother. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to cry. He wanted to assert his dominance in front of the entire family, proving once again that he controlled every aspect of our lives. The sheer audacity of his speech was staggering. He stood there puffing his chest out in his tailored tuxedo jacket, claiming he had funded my life, claiming he was the sole provider, claiming Brianna's newly launched lifestyle brand was a testament to his superior genetics and business acumen. My jaw tightened. The physical pain in my back from the fall was slowly being replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I knew the truth. I knew exactly where the money for this mansion, for the silk tablecloths, for the imported wine, and for Brianna's fake business venture had actually come from. For the past 3 years, I had not just been crunching numbers at a boring desk job. I had been quietly, methodically, and ruthlessly auditing his entire fake real estate empire. I had tracked every wire transfer, every forged signature, every hidden shell company. I knew things about his finances that even his own accountants did not know. But as I sat on the floor looking up at his arrogant face, I kept my expression perfectly blank. I did not let the anger show. I did not scream or curse or throw a glass of wine in his face. I simply absorbed his words, letting them wash over me like fuel. He truly believed he was invincible. He believed his money shielded him from consequences. He believed that because my mother always cowardly agreed with him, he could treat me like a stray dog. "Do you hear me?" Warren demanded, his voice rising louder. "Or did you hit your head too hard on the way down?" I placed my palms flat against the cold hardwood and slowly pushed myself to a standing position. I did not rush. I took my time, deliberately dusting off the knees of my custom trousers. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer and adjusted my cuffs. I stood tall, refusing to shrink under his glare. The dining room remained perfectly quiet, save for the soft clinking of ice in someone's glass. I looked around the table, taking in the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family. This was the moment that would define the rest of my life. This was the exact moment the victim they had known for 35 years officially died. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, and heavy with their collective cruelty. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking the seconds of my silence. I looked at Warren's face, red with exertion and false pride. His chest was heaving slightly from the effort of his own performance. He was waiting for my breakdown. He was waiting for the tears that he had so often forced out of me when I was a teenager. He wanted the satisfaction of breaking my spirit on Christmas Eve in front of an audience. He craved the power of seeing me emotionally crumble under the weight of his authority. But I was not a teenager anymore. I was a 35-year-old woman who held the absolute destruction of his entire world on a secure, encrypted server in my apartment downtown. The urge to laugh out loud was sudden and intense, but I swallowed it down. I just stared at him, my face a calm, unreadable mask, locking eyes with the man who had just sealed his own devastating fate. The heavy silence that followed my standoff with Warren did not last long. It was broken first by a low, arrogant chuckle coming from the far side of the table. I shifted my gaze and saw Andre, my brother-in-law, leaning back in his chair. He brought a crystal glass of expensive Cabernet to his lips, hiding a wide, amused grin behind the rim. Andre was a man whose entire identity was built on credit cards and borrowed status. He was drowning in personal debt, desperately clinging to Warren's wealth to fund his flashy lifestyle. Watching me get humiliated was an absolute sport to him. It made him feel secure in his own precarious position within the family hierarchy. He chuckled again, swirling his wine, clearly enjoying the free entertainment. Next to him, Brianna was practically glowing with satisfaction. She did not even try to hide her smirk. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the imported silk tablecloth, and slowly, purposefully adjusted the heavy diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist. That bracelet was supposedly a launch gift from Warren celebrating her new lifestyle brand. In reality, it was bought with money funneled directly from my stolen trust fund. But she did not know that yet. To her, that bracelet was just another symbol of her undeniable superiority. She looked at me like I was a peasant who had accidentally wandered into a royal banquet. She had always thrived on my degradation. It was the only way she knew how to feel special in a house built on shallow appearances. But neither Andre's mocking laughter nor Brianna's cruel smirk truly hurt me. I expected that exact behavior from them. What I was looking for was the reaction of the one person in the room who actually shared my blood. I slowly turned my head toward the opposite end of the table where my mother Yvonne was seated. I waited for her to speak. I waited for her to stand up to tell her husband that he had gone too far, and that you do not physically rip a chair out from under your own flesh and blood on Christmas Eve. Instead, Yvonne kept her eyes locked on her pristine white porcelain dinner plate. Her shoulders were tense and her posture was rigid. She blatantly refused to look at me. She picked up her heavy silver fork and nervously pushed a piece of honey-glazed carrot around her plate. The sheer cowardice rolling off her was suffocating. She loved her exclusive country club memberships, her luxury sport utility vehicles, and her endless designer shopping sprees far more than she ever loved her own daughter. Keeping Warren happy was her full-time job, and I was just an inconvenient distraction to her perfect holiday aesthetic. When the heavy silence from my end of the table dragged on for too long, Yvonne finally cracked under the immense pressure. She leaned forward slightly, keeping her voice low in a pathetic attempt to sound maternal. "Camille, please," she whispered, her tone laced with deep irritation rather than any actual empathy. "Just stop making a scene. Do not ruin the holiday for everyone. Just go into the kitchen and ask the private caterers to make you a plate. We can talk about this later. Go to the kitchen." That was my mother's brilliant solution to 35 years of emotional abuse. Just hide away out of sight like the hired help so they could all enjoy their imported wine and stolen wealth in total peace. Something inside me fundamentally shifted in that exact second. For my entire life, I had harbored a tiny, microscopic sliver of hope that one day my mother would finally choose me. That one day she would realize how profoundly toxic this environment was and walk out the front door with me. That lingering childhood hope died right there on the expensive Persian rug. And the sudden death of that hope was the most intoxicating, liberating experience of my entire life. Warren crossed his thick arms over his chest, waiting for my predictable response. He fully expected me to argue. He expected me to raise my voice, demanding the basic respect I deserved. Or better yet, he expected me to burst into pathetic tears and storm out of the house in a massive emotional breakdown. That was the toxic dynamic he was so used to. He pushed, I reacted, and then he punished me for reacting. It was a sick psychological game he had played for 2 long decades. But I absolutely refused to play his game anymore. I did not shed a single tear. My breathing steadied. My elevated heart rate dropped back to a calm, normal rhythm. A profound, chilling calm washed over my entire body, relaxing every muscle in my neck and shoulders. I stood perfectly still, taking one final, analytical look at the pathetic group of people sitting around that opulent dining table. I reached down and methodically dusted off the front of my custom-tailored suit. I smoothed out the premium fabric, making sure there was not a single wrinkle left from the fall. I adjusted my posture, standing much taller than Warren despite his intimidating physical size. Then I looked directly into his arrogant eyes and I smiled. It was not a forced defensive smile. It was not a nervous grin meant to mask my pain. It was a genuine, deeply relaxed smile of absolute, undeniable certainty. It was the terrifying smile of a seasoned predator who has just watched their prey walk willingly into a steel trap and lock the cage door from the inside. Warren frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in sudden, utter confusion. He did not understand what he was looking at. The smug, untouchable satisfaction began to rapidly drain from his face, replaced by a sudden flicker of genuine unease. This was not the script he had written in his head. I was supposed to be completely broken. I was supposed to be thoroughly embarrassed. I was definitely not supposed to be smiling at him like I knew a dark, catastrophic secret that could end his entire lavish lifestyle. "You are right, Warren," I said. My voice was incredibly smooth and completely empty of any anger or sorrow. It carried clearly across the massive dining room, cutting sharply through the soft, holiday background music. I do not belong here. I let those exact words hang in the air for a long moment, watching the uncomfortable confusion ripple across the beautifully decorated table. Andre immediately stopped chuckling his wine glass, pausing halfway to his mouth. Brianna's arrogant smirk faltered slightly as she stared at me. Yvonne finally looked up from her dinner plate, her eyes wide with sudden apprehension. They were all holding their breath, waiting for the punchline, waiting for me to scream, or threaten to cut them out of my life forever. But I had absolutely nothing else to say to these people. I did not need to issue any dramatic verbal threats. The legal and financial wheels were already securely in motion, and nothing they said or did tonight could stop the federal avalanche that was coming for them in the morning. Without another single word, I turned my back on the grand dining table. I did not rush or run away. I walked with slow, highly measured steps, my polished heels clicking rhythmically and confidently against the hardwood floor. Each deliberate step felt like a heavy iron chain snapping completely off my ankles. I walked out of the formal dining room and headed straight down the long, illuminated hallway toward the massive chef's kitchen to grab my coat and my belongings. Behind me, there was absolutely no triumphant laughter to celebrate my exit. There was only a heavy, suffocating, confused silence. I had left them all in a state of profound psychological discomfort. My unnatural lack of emotion had unsettled them deeply. They were a toxic family that strictly fed on high drama, and by completely denying them a reaction, I had successfully starved them. I could practically feel Warren staring daggers at my back, his arrogant mind furiously trying to calculate exactly why his ultimate humiliation tactic had completely failed to break my spirit. He would find out soon enough. He would find out exactly why I was smiling. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to the massive chef's kitchen. The room was a sprawling expanse of cold white marble countertops and gleaming stainless steel appliances. The private caterers had already retreated to the back pantry, leaving the main kitchen space eerily quiet compared to the dining room I had just escaped. I walked straight toward the coat closet near the back exit, wanting nothing more than to grab my belongings and walk out into the freezing December night. Before my hand could even touch the brass handle of the closet door, I heard the frantic clicking of designer heels echoing rapidly down the hallway. The kitchen door swung open forcefully behind me. "Camille, what on earth are you doing?" my mother hissed. Her voice was an urgent, panicked whisper. I turned around slowly to face her. Yvonne was breathing heavily, her eyes darting around the room to make sure none of the catering staff were close enough to overhear us. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown, her makeup perfectly applied, and her hair immaculately styled. She looked the part of the wealthy, successful matriarch. But beneath all that expensive grooming, she was just a frightened woman desperately clinging to a man who controlled her purse strings. She did not rush over to check if I was injured. She did not ask if my back was bruised from hitting the solid oak floor. She did not ask if my pride was hurt. She just looked at me with an expression of sheer intense annoyance. "Why do you always have to provoke him?" Yvonne demanded, pacing back and forth across the imported tile floor. Her hands were trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her expensive dress. "You know exactly how Warren gets about respect. You know he considers that his table. Why could you not just sit somewhere else? Why do you always have to make things so incredibly difficult for everyone?" I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her words sink in. He physically assaulted me, Mother. I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. He pulled a chair out from under me in front of the entire family. And your first instinct is to follow me into the kitchen and ask why I provoked him. Yvonne waved her manicured hand in the air, completely dismissing my reality. Oh, please, Camille, do not be dramatic. You are overreacting as usual. It was just a heavy-handed joke. He was simply trying to make a point about family traditions and knowing your place. But you just had to stand there and give him that creepy silent smile of yours. You embarrassed him in front of Andre and Brianna. You humiliated me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice into that familiar pleading tone she had used on me since I was a teenager. It was the specific tone of maternal guilt that used to make me cave every single time. Camille, please, she begged, reaching out to briefly touch my arm before pulling her hand back. It is Christmas Eve. I have spent weeks planning this dinner. I hired the best caterers. I decorated the entire house. I just want one nice, peaceful holiday where my family gets along. Is that really too much to ask? Can you not just swallow your pride for one single night for my sake? I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of detachment. This was how she maintained her illusion of peace. She weaponized my empathy. She knew I was the only person in the family who possessed a conscience, so she constantly demanded that I be the bigger person. She demanded that I absorb the abuse, the insults, and the blatant disrespect so she could pretend her marriage was perfect. I need you to go back out there. Yvonne continued, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. I need you to walk back into that dining room right now and apologize to Warren. Just tell him you overreacted to his joke. And you need to apologize to Brianna too. Tell her you are sorry for making a scene on her special night. If you do that, he will calm down and we can all go back to eating. We can just pretend none of this ever happened. Pretend none of this ever happened. That was the official family motto. That was the foundational rule of Yvonne's entire existence. If Warren screamed at the landscaping staff, we pretended it did not happen. If Brianna maxed out another high-limit credit card on a useless luxury vacation, we pretended it did not happen. And if Warren publicly humiliated the stepdaughter he despised, we were absolutely required to pretend it did not happen. For 20 years I had played my part in this sick theatrical production. I had swallowed my pride, I had bitten my tongue, I had apologized for things I never did just to keep the fragile peace in this massive empty house. I had allowed my mother to sacrifice my mental health on the altar of her financial security. But looking at my mother right now, standing in her designer gown and defending the man who had just dropped me to the floor, I felt absolutely nothing. The guilt trip that used to paralyze me completely failed to land. I looked at her sparkling diamond necklace, and I finally accepted the harsh reality I had been avoiding for years. My mother had sold me out for a zip code. She had chosen this luxury lifestyle over protecting her own flesh and blood. I am not apologizing to anyone, Yvonne, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am leaving, Yvonne gasped, stepping directly in front of the coat closet to physically block my path. You cannot leave, she practically hissed, her face turning red. If you walk out that front door right now, Warren will cut you off completely. He will write you out of the will, Camille. He will stop paying for your little apartment. You will get absolutely nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing. You will be completely on your own. I just stared at her. She truly believed that Warren's money was the only thing keeping me tied to this family. She actually thought I was waiting around for a handout from a man I entirely despised. She believed I was still the helpless, dependent girl she had raised. She had no idea that I already had everything. She had no idea about the dual life I had been living or what was currently sitting on my highly encrypted hard drive. As Yvonne continued to ramble, her voice bouncing off the cold marble walls of the kitchen, I completely tuned out her words. I simply watched her mouth move. She was frantically threatening me with poverty, warning me that Warren would cut off my allowance and stop paying the rent on what she assumed was my tiny, cramped apartment. She truly believed I was a struggling 35-year-old woman surviving on the meager charity of her arrogant husband. She thought my job as a financial analyst was just a boring entry-level position that barely covered my groceries. She did not know that I am a senior financial fraud investigator for one of the most ruthless corporate risk management firms in the country. My entire career is dedicated to dismantling the exact type of financial illusions Warren spent his life building. I do not just crunch numbers. I hunt down white-collar criminals. I track hidden assets across international borders. I expose complex money laundering operations for federal agencies. I am the person greedy men fear when the IRS knocks on their doors. And for the last 3 long years, I had turned every single one of my professional skills directly onto my own stepfather. It started exactly 36 months ago. I was working late one evening running a routine forensic audit on a corporate vendor for a client. A specific limited liability company popped up on my screen, and the registered address caught my eye. It was a private mailbox rental suite in downtown Atlanta. The exact same mailbox address Warren used to receive his private business mail when I was a teenager. It could have been a coincidence, but my instincts told me otherwise. I pulled the thread, and what I unraveled over the next 3 years was a staggering masterpiece of federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft. Warren did not build a real estate empire. Warren is not a self-made millionaire. He is a parasite. My biological father was a quiet, incredibly intelligent man who owned a successful logistics company. Before he passed away unexpectedly when I was just 15 years old, he made sure my future was completely secure. He liquidated his most valuable assets and established an ironclad trust fund in my name. It was a massive portfolio of stocks, bonds, and prime real estate investments designed to automatically transfer to my control on my 25th birthday. It was his final act of love for his only child. But then Yvonne married Warren. Warren stepped into our grieving household, projecting the image of a wealthy savior. The truth was, he was drowning in debt from a string of failed business ventures. He saw my mother's vulnerability and my father's massive trust fund as his ultimate lifeline. Shortly after he married my mother, Warren manipulated her into signing a series of complex legal documents giving him temporary conservatorship over my finances. Once he had the legal foothold he needed, he systematically went to work. By the time I turned 25, the trust fund was supposed to be mine. But Warren told me a very convincing lie. He sat me down in his luxurious home office and handed me a stack of fabricated financial reports claiming the stock market had crashed my father's investments. He told me the trust was empty. He played the hero, offering to pay for my college education out of his own pocket, out of the goodness of his heart. I believed him. I was young, grieving, and I trusted the man my mother had chosen. The forensic audit I conducted 3 years ago revealed the sickening reality. The money was never lost in the stock market. Warren had painstakingly siphoned every single dollar out of my father's trust. He used an intricate web of dummy corporations, forged signatures, and offshore holding accounts to wash the money and funnel it directly into his own personal bank accounts. Every single luxury condo development he claimed to have built, every commercial property he flipped, and every custom-tailored suit he wore was financed using my stolen inheritance as collateral. He had stolen millions of dollars from a grieving teenager to fund his own pathetic delusions of grandeur. But the ultimate insult, the absolute pinnacle of his audacity, was Brianna. My golden child stepsister loved to parade around social media as a brilliant self-made entrepreneur. For the past 2 years, she had been aggressively promoting her new luxury lifestyle brand. She launched premium skincare lines, boutique storefronts, and hosted massive, lavish launch parties in downtown Atlanta. She constantly gave interviews about her fierce work ethic and her brilliant business mind. My mother praised her constantly, using Brianna's fake success as a weapon to make me feel small and inadequate. My audit proved that Brianna's entire company was a massive financial black hole. She had no business sense whatsoever. She was burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month. And the startup capital for her precious lifestyle brand was entirely funded by illegal wire transfers originating directly from the remnants of my biological father's trust fund. Every time Brianna swiped her corporate card for a luxury vacation, every time she bought a designer handbag, and every time she adjusted that sparkling diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, she was literally wearing my stolen legacy. For 3 years, I carried this explosive secret in absolute silence. I knew that if I confronted Warren without an airtight case, he would use his expensive lawyers to crush me. He would destroy the evidence and move the remaining assets overseas. So I waited. I played the role of the quiet, resentful scapegoat. I let them mock my clothes. I let them insult my career. I endured agonizing family holidays sitting at that dining room table while they spent my money right in front of my face. I spent my nights meticulously downloading bank records, tax filings, and property deeds. I built a bulletproof federal dossier linking every single fraudulent transaction directly back to Warren's personal devices. I secured a judge-approved injunction ready to freeze every single one of his accounts at a moment's notice. I did not just want my money back. I wanted him to face the absolute maximum federal prison sentence available under the law. And now, standing in the kitchen watching my mother desperately beg me to go apologize to this monster, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The trap was fully set. The cage door was securely locked. "Warren will not give you another dime if you walk out that door," Camille Yvonne warned, her voice shaking with genuine fear. "You will have nothing." I blinked slowly, bringing myself back to the present moment. I looked at Yvonne's panicked face and felt a cold, terrifying calm wash over me. She was so completely blind to the reality of her own life. She had no idea that her pristine credit cards were hours away from being declined across the city. She had no idea that the massive mansion we were currently standing in was heavily mortgaged against fraudulent collateral, and the bank was already preparing to foreclose. "I will take my chances, Mother," I said, my voice soft but entirely unyielding. I stepped around her, ignoring her sudden gasp of outrage. I reached into the coat closet and pulled out my wool trench coat, slipping it over my shoulders. I grabbed my leather handbag, making sure my encrypted work laptop was secure inside. I had nothing left to say to her. The time for arguments had passed years ago. Now it was simply time for execution. "Where are you going?" Yvonne demanded, stepping forward to grab my arm. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the fabric of my coat. "You cannot do this to us. You are ruining Christmas." I looked down at her hand resting on my arm. I did not pull away immediately. I just stared at her fingers until she slowly, self-consciously let go. "I am not ruining anything, Yvonne," I replied smoothly. "I am just giving Warren exactly what he asked for. I am removing myself from his table." Without another word, I turned my back on my mother and walked briskly toward the hallway leading to the front door. The kitchen swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of her frustrated sighs. I was finally leaving this toxic house, and I was never coming back as a guest ever again. The next time I stepped foot through these doors, I would be the legal owner. I reached out to push the swinging kitchen door open, but before my hand could even connect with the solid wood, it swung inward violently. I took a quick, calculated step back, just in time to avoid getting hit in the face. Standing in the doorway, completely blocking my exit, was my brother-in-law, Andre. He had a smug, incredibly self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. His expensive tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, revealing a flashy designer belt and a silk shirt he definitely could not afford on his own legitimate salary. Andre was a man whose entire personality was built entirely on the illusion of massive success. He worked some mid-level corporate sales job downtown, but he walked around the suburbs like he was a chief executive officer simply because he had managed to marry my stepsister Brianna. He was a textbook leech. He had attached himself to Warren's fraudulent wealth the moment he realized how easily the old man handed out cash to buy loyalty. Andre spent every waking moment desperately trying to prove he belonged in this opulent high society world, constantly overcompensating with loud designer labels and obnoxious luxury vehicles. He strolled past me without offering a single word of apology for nearly taking my nose off with the heavy door. He made a direct line for the massive commercial-grade stainless steel refrigerator, where the private caterers had stored the backup bottles of vintage champagne. He pulled open the heavy glass door, grabbed a chilled bottle of imported liquor by the neck, and turned around, finally acknowledging the heavy, suffocating tension in the room. Andre looked over at my mother Yvonne, who was still standing near the marble kitchen island, looking absolutely frantic and defeated. Then he slowly shifted his gaze over to me, standing firmly by the door, wrapped in my heavy winter wool coat, ready to leave into the freezing December night. His grin widened into a condescending, arrogant smirk. Andre absolutely loved it whenever I was the direct target of Warren's toxic rage. It was a sick, twisted dynamic. Every time Warren publicly humiliated me, it distracted the rest of the family from Andre's own glaring financial inadequacies. Putting me down was the easiest way for him to artificially elevate his own fragile status within the family hierarchy. He leaned casually against the cold marble countertop, crossing his ankles and tapping the heavy green glass of the champagne bottle against his leg. "Do not be mad, Cam," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing fake pity. "Warren just paid off my Porsche this morning. It was an early Christmas present. Maybe if you smiled more and stopped acting so superior all the time, he would toss you a bone every now and then. You really need to learn how to play the game." I stood perfectly still, just staring at his smug face. The absolute audacity of this man was almost comical. He was standing in a heavily mortgaged house drinking champagne he did not buy, bragging about a sports car he could not afford to maintain, and giving me life advice on how to secure a handout. My analytical mind immediately went to work, pulling up the exact financial data I had secured on my encrypted hard drive regarding his precious new car. I knew exactly how Warren had paid off that high-performance Porsche. Warren did not write a personal check out of the goodness of his heart. He used a dummy corporation registered in Delaware under the name Apex Holdings to execute a wire transfer directly to the luxury car dealership. And the initial seed money funding Apex Holdings came directly from the liquidated stock portfolio that originally belonged to my late biological father. Andre was literally driving around Atlanta in a vehicle purchased with my stolen inheritance. He thought he was a brilliant player in Warren's inner circle, but he was actually just a completely clueless pawn holding stolen goods. I knew his real credit score. I knew about the 3 secret credit cards he had maxed out just trying to keep up with Brianna's reckless daily spending habits. I knew he was drowning in personal debt, and that shiny new car was the only thing keeping his fragile male ego intact. I did not scream at him. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not even attempt to explain the massive federal storm that was currently gathering right above his head. I just looked at him with the exact same cold, clinical detachment I use when I am interviewing a white-collar criminal who has not yet realized I already have their bank records. "Enjoy the car, Andre," I said, my voice perfectly level and quiet. "I hope the title is clear." The immediate shift in his body language was incredibly satisfying to watch. The smug, self-satisfied grin vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a sharp, confused frown. He stopped tapping the champagne bottle against his leg. He uncrossed his ankles and stood up a little straighter, his defensive instincts kicking in. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice losing all of its previous arrogant confidence. It was a simple sentence, but it struck the exact core of his deepest insecurity. Andre lived in a constant state of financial paranoia, always terrified that someone was going to discover he was a complete fraud. He knew Warren engaged in shady business practices, even if he did not know the full federal extent of the illegal activity. Mentioning the vehicle title planted an immediate massive seed of doubt in his mind. He knew enough about luxury car financing to understand that if a third-party company paid off a loan, the ownership paperwork could become incredibly complicated if that company ever faced legal scrutiny. I did not offer him a single word of explanation. I did not break my eye contact, and I certainly did not smile. I just let the heavy implications of my words hang in the silent kitchen air, wrapping tightly around his throat. I could see the wheels spinning desperately in his mind, trying to figure out if I was just making an empty, angry threat or if I actually knew something devastating about his beloved sports car. Yvonne stepped forward, breaking the silence, her voice completely laced with panic. "Camille, what are you talking about? Stop trying to ruin this night for everyone. Just leave if you are going to leave." I glanced at my mother one last time, feeling nothing but absolute pity for the miserable reality she was about to wake up to in the morning. She had chosen her side decades ago, and there was nothing left to salvage between us. "Merry Christmas, Yvonne," I said softly. I turned my back on both of them, placing my hand flat against the heavy wooden door. I pushed it open and walked out of the kitchen, stepping into the long, brightly lit hallway. I left André standing frozen against the marble counter, staring blankly at the wall with a bottle of champagne he suddenly had no desire to open. His mind was already racing, wondering if the dealership was going to call him tomorrow. He had absolutely no idea that a tow truck would be pulling into his driveway by 9 o'clock the next morning, because the federal authorities were about to seize every single asset tied to Apex Holdings. My polished heels clicked against the hardwood floors as I made my way down the corridor. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. I had successfully detached myself from the emotional manipulation in the kitchen, but I knew my exit was not quite finished yet. I still had to make it to the front door, and I knew exactly who was waiting to intercept me in the main foyer. Brianna was never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, and I was fully prepared to let her dig her own grave before I walked out into the cold night. I stepped out of the long hallway and entered the massive grand foyer of the house. The ceiling soared 2 stories high with a massive crystal chandelier, casting a warm golden glow over the imported Italian marble floor. Directly in front of the heavy double doors stood Brianna. She was leaning casually against the base of the sweeping mahogany staircase, perfectly positioning herself to block my only exit. She had clearly rushed out of the dining room the second I left for the kitchen, wanting to make absolutely sure she had the final word before I disappeared into the night. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal wine glass as I approached. "Running away so soon, Camille?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the large open space. "You always were so incredibly dramatic. I swear you ruin every single holiday with your pathetic pity parties." I did not break my stride. I walked over to the antique console table near the door where I had left my leather gloves and my car keys. I picked them up with slow, methodical movements, completely ignoring her presence. My silence was the one thing that always drove her absolutely crazy. Brianna needed an audience. She needed a loud, emotional reaction to validate her own cruel behavior. When I did not give her one, she pushed off the staircase and took 2 aggressive steps toward me, the heels of her designer shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble. "Look at you," she sneered, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing up and down my tailored suit. 35 years old and completely alone. You have no husband, no children, and no real career to speak of. You just sit in a gray cubicle all day crunching numbers for people who actually matter. It is honestly just sad, Camille. I look at your life and I just feel an overwhelming sense of pity." I slid my hands into my leather gloves, making sure the fit was perfectly snug. I turned to face her, looking at the woman who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to make herself feel taller. She was wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people made in an entire month. Her hair and makeup were flawlessly executed by the private glam squad Warren had paid to come to the house earlier that afternoon. She looked like a billionaire heiress, but my forensic audit told a completely different story. I knew the exact negative balance of her primary business checking account. "You are just jealous," Brianna continued, taking another step closer, so I could smell the heavy, expensive perfume radiating off her skin. "You have always been jealous of me. Warren loves me because I actually bring value to this family. I bring joy. I bring true prestige. I just launched a luxury lifestyle brand that is going to take over the entire city of Atlanta. What do you do, Camille? You are just a dark, depressing cloud." You are nothing but a lingering reminder of a dead man. That last comment about my biological father was specifically designed to make me lose my temper. 10 years ago, it would have worked perfectly. 10 years ago, I would have screamed at her and vehemently defended my father's honor. But tonight, her words carried absolutely no weight whatsoever. They were the desperate, empty insults of a woman who had never accomplished a single genuine thing in her entire life. She truly thought she had everything. She thought her marriage to Andre was the picture of suburban perfection, completely blind to the fact that her husband was currently drowning in secret credit card debt just to buy her affection. She thought her lifestyle brand was a massive financial success, completely unaware that her vendors were currently preparing to sue her for thousands of dollars in unpaid invoices. She lived in a delicate, fragile bubble of stolen money, and she was spending her final hours of peace mocking the exact person who held the needle. I looked down at her sparkling diamond tennis bracelet. I knew the exact routing number of the offshore account Warren had used to purchase it. I looked at the smug, confident smile on her face, and I felt a deep, profound sense of professional satisfaction. I was not just looking at my cruel stepsister. I was looking at a textbook accessory to federal wire fraud. "You are right, Brianna," I said, my voice perfectly calm and even. "You truly have it all. You have the perfect husband, the perfect business, and the perfect father. You are building an incredible legacy for yourself." My complete lack of resistance caught her totally off guard. She blinked, her arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second as she tried to decipher my tone. She was waiting for the bitter sarcasm, but I delivered the words with absolute deadpan sincerity. I wanted her to feel as high and mighty as humanly possible before the ground completely vanished beneath her feet tomorrow morning. She recovered quickly, tossing her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder and lifting her chin proudly. "Well, I am glad you finally have the basic decency to admit it," she said, her voice dripping with extreme arrogance. "It takes a lot for a bitter, jealous person to admit when they have been completely bested. Maybe there is some hope for you after all. But you really need to learn how to show some respect to the people who are funding your pathetic little life." She shifted her weight, resting her hand on her hip. She wanted to savor this moment. She believed she had finally broken my spirit right here in the grand foyer. She thought my calm demeanor was the ultimate sign of my total emotional defeat. She believed I was walking out of this mansion with my tail tucked between my legs entirely and completely crushed by her obvious superiority. I secured my leather handbag over my shoulder and looked directly into her eyes. The urge to explain the harsh reality of her financial situation was completely gone. I did not want to warn her. I did not want to give her a single second to prepare for the massive federal investigation that was about to rip her luxury lifestyle brand into tiny pieces. I just wanted to finish packing my things and walk out to my car in peace. But Brianna was not quite finished with her theatrical performance. Gloating verbally was simply not enough for her massive ego. She needed a physical prop to truly hammer home the massive power dynamic she believed existed between us. She reached into the pocket of her expensive designer dress with a cruel, calculated look in her eyes. She had prepared a final, humiliating gesture specifically for this exact moment, fully intending to twist the knife one last time before I walked out the door. Brianna pulled her hand out of the deep pocket of her designer dress and held out a small, slightly bent piece of cardboard. It was a cheap generic gift card to a chain coffee shop down the street from my office. The amount printed in bold black ink across the top was $20. She held it out to me, holding it between two perfectly manicured fingers, as if she were handing a piece of bread to a starving beggar on the street. "I know things are incredibly tight for you right now, Camille," she said, projecting her voice just loud enough so that anyone lingering near the hallway could hear her incredible generosity. "With your boring little entry-level salary, I am sure you cannot afford to treat yourself very often. Consider this my Christmas gift to you. Go buy yourself a nice warm latte on your way to work next week. You look like you could really use the caffeine." I looked down at the $20 gift card. The sheer absurdity of the gesture was almost beautiful in its cruelty. She was wearing a diamond bracelet purchased with my stolen inheritance, standing in a luxury foyer funded by my biological father's hard work, and she was offering me $20 to buy a cup of coffee. I slowly reached out and took the small cardboard sleeve from her fingers. I slipped it casually into the side pocket of my leather handbag, without breaking eye contact. "Thank you, Brianna," I said, my tone perfectly flat. "That is incredibly generous of you." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with toxic satisfaction. But the coffee card was just the opening act. She turned her attention to the antique mahogany console table right next to us. Resting on top of the polished wood was a thick, heavy navy blue envelope with a gold wax seal pressed into the flap. Brianna had clearly placed it there earlier in the evening, strategically setting up her ultimate prop for this exact confrontation. She picked up the envelope and slid her finger under the flap, pulling out a stack of crisp, thick legal documents. She held the paperwork up, making sure the bright chandelier light caught the official notary stamps at the bottom of the pages. "And since we are sharing our holiday blessings, I thought you might want to see what Warren got for me this evening," Brianna said, her voice practically vibrating with smug excitement. "It is a brand new luxury penthouse condo in Midtown, 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a private rooftop terrace. Warren bought it for me outright, as a reward for all my hard work with my lifestyle brand. He said a successful entrepreneur needs a primary residence that reflects her high social status." She shoved the first page of the heavy legal document toward my face, absolutely desperate for me to see the astronomical purchase price and the official transfer of ownership. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of Warren's blatant favoritism. She wanted me to look at that deed and realize that while I was handed a $20 coffee card, she was being gifted millions of dollars in prime real estate. I lowered my eyes and looked at the crisp white paper. My trained analytical mind immediately bypassed the impressive purchase price and scanned straight down to the fine print at the bottom of the page. I ignored the signature lines and zeroed in directly on the official legal name of the purchasing entity. Right there, printed in bold black ink, was the name of the holding company that had officially transferred the property to Brianna. Apex Horizon Properties, LLC. A sudden jolt of pure professional adrenaline rushed through my veins, completely wiping away any lingering physical pain in my back from my fall in the dining room. I knew that exact limited liability company. I had spent 3 weeks tracking its complex financial movements. Apex Horizon Properties was not a legitimate real estate firm. It was the primary offshore dummy corporation Warren had established specifically to launder the last remaining liquid assets from my biological father's trust fund. I had already flagged that exact LLC in my master dossier. I had traced the routing numbers directly to Warren's private servers, and I had already forwarded that specific corporate footprint to my contacts at the federal level. By officially transferring this luxury penthouse into Brianna's name using that highly illegal shell company, Warren had not given her a generous Christmas gift. He had unknowingly handed her a massive radioactive liability. Brianna's own signature on those legally binding documents directly tied her to a massive federal money laundering operation. By accepting that multi-million-dollar property, she was legally receiving stolen funds. When the federal agents executed their warrants in the morning, that beautiful new condo would be one of the very first assets seized by the government. And Brianna would be forced to explain to a federal judge exactly how she acquired it. I looked back up at her incredibly smug face. She was completely oblivious. She thought she was holding a golden ticket to high society, but she was actually holding the exact legal evidence that would drag her into a devastating criminal investigation. She was so entirely consumed by her own vanity and her desperate need to prove her superiority over me that she had blindly signed her own financial death warrant. "It is a beautiful piece of paper, Brianna," I said, allowing a small, genuine smile to finally touch the corners of my mouth. She beamed completely, mistaking my cold satisfaction for genuine awe and defeat. "I knew you would be impressed," she said, pulling the documents back and carefully sliding them into the navy blue envelope. It just goes to show you, Camille, that hard work and loyalty to this family truly pays off. Maybe if you stop being so difficult, Warren will eventually help you upgrade from that depressing little apartment of yours. I nodded slowly, buttoning the front of my wool trench coat. You should really hold on to those documents, Brianna. Keep them somewhere incredibly safe. You are going to need every single page of that paperwork very soon. She laughed, a high-pitched, dismissive sound that echoed off the tall marble walls. Oh, do not worry about me, Camille. I have a private safe in my new master bedroom. I know exactly how to protect my assets. The tragic irony of her statement hung heavily in the air between us. She had absolutely no idea how to protect her assets because she had never actually earned a single one of them. I adjusted the strap of my leather handbag on my shoulder, feeling a deep, profound sense of finality. The ambush in the hallway had failed spectacularly. Brianna had tried to deliver the final crushing blow to my self-esteem, but instead she had just given me the ultimate confirmation that my master plan was completely flawless. I stepped around her, moving toward the massive double doors leading out to the front driveway. Brianna did not try to physically block me this time. She simply stood by the mahogany staircase, clutching her fraudulent property deed to her chest, looking incredibly satisfied with her performance. She truly believed she had won the war. She believed she had successfully broken the family scapegoat and secured her spot at the very top of the financial hierarchy. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the cold brass handle of the front door. The heavy wood swung open easily, letting in a sharp gust of freezing winter air. The cold wind felt incredible against my skin, washing away the suffocating toxic atmosphere of the mansion. I was one step away from freedom, one step away from driving back to my penthouse and initiating the total destruction of their fake empire. But just as I stepped over the threshold, a heavy, commanding voice echoed from the hallway behind me, demanding my immediate attention. "Leaving so soon, Camille," the voice boomed, bouncing off the high ceiling of the grand foyer. I paused with one foot already on the stone porch. I did not need to turn around to know exactly what kind of expression Warren was wearing. I slowly pivoted my body back toward the interior of the house, letting the cold winter wind blow past me into the warm entrance hall. Warren stepped out from the main hallway and walked to stand directly beside Brianna. He looked incredibly imposing in his expensive tailored tuxedo, holding a fresh glass of bourbon in his large hand. He had clearly left his dinner right after my mother begged him to calm down, simply to make absolutely certain I was actually being expelled from the property. He needed to witness my physical departure to fully satisfy his massive ego. He placed a heavy, affectionate hand on Brianna's shoulder, pulling his golden child close to his side. It was a perfectly calculated physical gesture, designed to show me exactly who belonged in this family, and who was being thrown out into the cold. Brianna leaned into him, looking up at her father with an expression of pure adoration that honestly made my stomach turn. They were two perfect parasites feeding off the exact same stolen host. "I hope you learned a valuable lesson tonight," Camille Warren said, his voice thick with arrogant authority. "You cannot just walk into my house, eat my food, and disrespect the people who actually built this family. Your mother tries her best to include you, but you always make it so incredibly difficult. You have a massive chip on your shoulder, and until you learn how to drop it and show some genuine respect, you will never be welcome at my table." He took a slow sip of his bourbon, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the final desperate plea for forgiveness or the bitter, angry tears of a rejected child. That was how the cycle always ended, but the cycle was completely shattered now. I looked at this man, the man who had stolen millions of dollars from a grieving teenager, who had manipulated my weak mother, and who had funded a lifestyle of absolute luxury using money my biological father bled to earn. I looked at the expensive fabric of his suit, the heavy gold watch on his wrist, and the smug, satisfied grin on his face. I did not see an intimidating patriarch. I saw a desperate criminal who was completely out of time. I saw a man whose entire existence was built on a fragile house of cards that I was about to incinerate with a single keystroke. I shifted my weight and looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not flinch under his heavy gaze. I let the absolute silence of the freezing night air fill the space between us. The longer I stared without speaking, the more his smug grin began to physically falter. He hated silence. Silence meant he was not in control of the narrative. "Merry Christmas, Warren," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady whisper that carried perfectly across the marble floor. "Make sure you answer your phone tomorrow." Warren furrowed his brow, his grip tightening slightly on his crystal bourbon glass. For a fraction of a second, I saw a genuine flicker of doubt cross his eyes. The absolute certainty in my voice, the total lack of fear, it unsettled him on a primal level. But his arrogance was too deeply ingrained to let him entertain the idea that I actually posed a threat. He quickly masked his momentary hesitation with a loud, booming laugh. It was a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed loudly into the quiet suburban night. "Get off my property, Camille," he chuckled, shaking his head as if I had just told a pathetic joke. "And do not bother calling your mother tomorrow. She will not be answering." He stepped forward and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the door. With one final sneer of pure disgust, he shoved the massive wooden door forward. It slammed shut with a thunderous, resonant boom that rattled the glass panes and the side lights. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place, immediately locking me out of the house. I stood on the stone porch for a long moment, completely enveloped in the freezing December air. The warm, golden light from the chandelier spilled out through the frosted glass windows, casting long shadows across the manicured front lawn. But I did not feel cold. I felt an intense, burning heat radiating from the center of my chest. It was the pure, unadulterated adrenaline of total liberation. I turned my back on the massive mansion and began walking down the long, sweeping driveway. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my polished heels. I did not look back at the grand columns or the expensive holiday decorations hanging from the roof. My mind was already detaching from the emotional reality of my family and shifting entirely into the cold, calculated mindset of a senior fraud investigator preparing to execute a massive tactical strike. I reached my car, parked on the street just outside the massive wrought iron gates. I unlocked the doors with my key fob and slid into the driver's seat. The leather interior was freezing, but I barely noticed. I tossed my leather handbag containing my encrypted work laptop onto the passenger seat. I gripped the steering wheel, wrapping my fingers tightly around the cold leather. The heavy silence of the car felt like a sanctuary after the suffocating noise of that dining room. I reached forward and pushed the ignition button. The engine roared to life, sending a low, powerful vibration through the floorboards. The digital dashboard illuminated, casting a soft blue glow across my face. I glanced down at the digital clock displayed in the center console. It was exactly 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes until midnight. 15 minutes until Christmas officially began. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the massive suburban estate far behind me in the rearview mirror. The residential streets were completely empty, lined with houses wrapped in twinkling holiday lights. It was a peaceful, silent night for everyone else in the city. But for Warren, Brianna, Andre, and my mother, the peace was merely a temporary illusion. As I drove toward the highway, heading downtown toward my private luxury penthouse, the last remaining shreds of the wounded scapegoat completely vanished from my psychology. I was no longer the humiliated stepdaughter lying on the hardwood floor. I was the architect of their absolute ruin. Every single piece of the puzzle was perfectly arranged. The federal agencies were on standby. The bank injunctions were fully approved by the courts. All I had to do was walk into my apartment, open my laptop, and press send. Warren had spent the last 20 years making sure I knew I did not belong in his world. Tonight, I was finally going to agree with him. I was going to completely dismantle his world so there would be absolutely nothing left for me to belong to. The drive into downtown Atlanta took exactly 20 minutes. The holiday traffic had completely vanished, leaving the multi-lane highway wide open. I navigated my car through the towering illuminated skyscrapers of the city center until I reached the private gated entrance of my building. It was an ultra-exclusive high-rise residential tower that catered specifically to high-net-worth individuals who valued absolute privacy and top-tier security. I pulled into the underground parking garage, flashing my key fob at the automated scanner. The heavy steel gate rolled open silently, allowing me access to my designated parking space next to the private elevator bank. I grabbed my leather handbag off the passenger seat and stepped out of the car. The temperature-controlled garage was perfectly quiet. I walked over to the private elevator and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner panel on the wall. The digital reader flashed a soft green light, recognizing my fingerprint instantly. The stainless steel doors slid open, and I stepped inside. There were no buttons to push. The elevator was pre-programmed to take me directly up to the top floor. As the elevator silently rocketed up 40 stories, I took a slow, deep breath, letting the clean, filtered air fill my lungs. I was entirely in my element now. My family believed I lived in a cramped, depressing apartment on the outskirts of the city because that was the exact narrative I had carefully fed them for years. I let them believe I was struggling because it kept their greedy hands completely out of my actual financial reality. They had absolutely no idea that my career as a senior financial fraud investigator paid an astronomical base salary, complete with massive performance bonuses for recovering stolen corporate assets. The elevator doors glided open, revealing the private foyer of my penthouse. I stepped over the threshold and walked into the massive open-concept living space. The entire back wall of the apartment consisted of floor-to-ceiling glass windows, offering a breathtaking, unobstructed panoramic view of the sparkling Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretched out for miles, glittering like diamonds against the dark winter night. My home was the exact opposite of Warren's gaudy, heavily mortgaged McMansion. There was no cheap gold trim, no fake imported marble, and absolutely no clutter. The interior design was sleek, minimalist, and incredibly modern. The floors were polished dark concrete, the furniture was custom-made, and the artwork on the walls consisted of genuine original pieces I had purchased directly from local artists. It was a true sanctuary of peace and quiet, built entirely on my own merit and hard work. Nobody in my family had ever stepped foot inside this space, and they never would. I dropped my keys into the small ceramic bowl near the entrance and slipped out of my wool trench coat, hanging it neatly in the front closet. I walked across the spacious living room toward the massive kitchen island. I opened the glass door of my built-in beverage refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of premium sparkling water. I poured the cold, bubbling liquid into a heavy crystal glass, the sound echoing softly in the quiet apartment. I took a slow, refreshing sip, letting the cold water wash away the lingering, bitter taste of the expensive wine from that miserable holiday dinner. I carried my glass down the short hallway leading to my private home office. This room was the true command center of my life. I pushed the heavy soundproof door open and flicked the light switch. The overhead recessed lighting illuminated a massive custom-built mahogany desk sitting squarely in the center of the room. Behind the desk was an ergonomic leather chair, and mounted on the wall were three large high-definition monitors connected to a massive custom-built server rack humming quietly in the corner of the room. This was not the home office of a glorified calculator. This was the secure operating base of a woman who hunted multi-million-dollar corporate criminals for a living. The servers in the corner were equipped with military-grade encryption, securely connected to international financial databases, and direct federal reporting networks. This was the exact room where I had spent the last 3 years meticulously mapping out every single fraudulent transaction Warren had ever executed. I walked around the desk and set my glass of sparkling water down on the leather coaster. I opened my handbag and carefully pulled out my encrypted work laptop. I placed it perfectly in the center of the desk, connecting the heavy braided docking cable that linked it directly to my triple monitor setup and the master servers. I sat down in my heavy leather chair, the plush material molding perfectly to my back. The physical pain from hitting the dining room floor was completely gone, now replaced by a sharp, laser-focused professional energy. I reached out and pressed the power button on the laptop dock. The three massive wall monitors instantly flickered to life, bathing the dark room in a cool blue and white glow. I typed my complex alphanumeric password into the master login screen, followed by a secondary biometric fingerprint scan to unlock the encrypted hard drive. The system authenticated my credentials, and the desktop loaded seamlessly. I glanced at the digital clock in the bottom corner of the central monitor. It was exactly 12 o'clock midnight. Christmas Day had officially arrived. I opened my secure file directory and navigated to the master folder labeled Operation Horizon. Inside that folder was the culmination of 36 months of relentless investigative work. It contained thousands of pages of digitized bank statements, routing numbers, offshore account ledgers, and legally obtained property deeds. It held the irrefutable evidence that my stepfather had embezzled millions of dollars from a trust fund established for a grieving teenager. It held the absolute proof that Brianna's luxury lifestyle brand was nothing more than a front for federal money laundering. The folder was perfectly organized, cross-referenced, and completely ready for federal prosecution. I did not need to make any last-minute adjustments. The narrative was bulletproof. The paper trail was absolutely undeniable. I reached for my wireless mouse and clicked on the primary master dossier file. The document opened on the center screen, displaying the comprehensive executive summary I had written specifically for the agents at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Unit. I took another slow sip of my sparkling water, my eyes scanning over the first few paragraphs of the summary. I thought about the arrogant smirk on Andre's face as he bragged about his new sports car. I thought about Brianna handing me a $20 coffee gift card while holding a fraudulent property deed. I thought about my mother begging me to apologize to the man who had just assaulted me. And finally, I thought about Warren standing in the grand foyer, completely convinced that he was an untouchable king simply because he was wearing a tailored tuxedo. They had pushed the wrong woman entirely too far. They had assumed my silence was a symptom of weakness and total submission. They had no idea that my silence was actually the deliberate calculation of a predator waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike. I placed both of my hands on the sleek mechanical keyboard, ready to initiate the cascade of financial ruin that would completely obliterate their false reality before the sun came up. I opened the first subfolder labeled Trust Fund Liquidation. The screen instantly populated with high-resolution scans of the original legal documents from 20 years ago. My biological father's signature was at the bottom of the first page establishing the massive portfolio. But on the second page, dated just 3 months after his death, was a completely different signature. It was Yvonne's handwriting signing over full power of attorney to Warren, and right below that was the fatal flaw. Warren had submitted a notarized document claiming I had legally consented to the transfer of my own assets to his holding company on my 18th birthday. I pulled up a magnified image of my own supposed signature. It was a pathetic forgery. He had traced an old signature from my high school permission slips, completely unaware that forensic analysis could easily prove the pen pressure and stroke angles were completely wrong. He had even bribed a corrupt local notary public to stamp the documents officially certifying the fraudulent transfer. I had already tracked down that specific notary 2 years ago and forwarded his information to the state licensing board, ensuring his absolute cooperation when the federal subpoenas eventually arrived. Gathering this level of irrefutable evidence had not been easy. It required an agonizing level of patience and absolute secrecy. For 3 entire years, I had to sit across from that man at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners listening to him brag about his incredible real estate investments, while I secretly knew every single property was built on a foundation of massive federal fraud. I used my position at the corporate risk management firm to access global financial databases that normal citizens could never even see. Every time my firm was contracted to audit a major bank in Atlanta, I quietly ran Warren's personal information through their internal risk assessment algorithms. I did not hack into anything illegally. I did not have to. Warren was incredibly sloppy because his massive ego convinced him he was entirely untouchable. He used the exact same passwords for his shell company accounts as he did for his personal country club memberships. He reused the same mailing addresses for dozens of fake corporations. He left a trail of digital breadcrumbs so wide a first-year accounting student could have followed it. I moved my mouse over to the second monitor and opened the folder labeled Wire Transfers. This was the absolute heart of the money laundering operation. A massive, intricate spreadsheet filled the screen, tracking millions of dollars flowing out of my original trust fund and directly into a complex web of limited liability companies. Apex Holdings was the primary artery. That was the dummy corporation he used to pay off Andre's high-performance Porsche. But there were dozens of others. He would transfer the stolen money into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, hold it there for exactly 6 months, and then wire it back into the domestic accounts of Brianna's luxury lifestyle brand, masquerading the stolen funds as legitimate venture capital investments. I had spent countless nights mapping Brianna's obnoxious social media posts directly to these illegal wire transfers. Every time she posted a photo holding a new designer handbag or standing in front of a private jet, I could look at the ledger and pinpoint the exact offshore transfer that funded her pathetic illusion of success. I pulled up the corporate tax filings for Brianna's company on the third monitor. It was a masterclass in federal tax evasion. She was claiming massive business losses every single quarter while simultaneously purchasing luxury vehicles, expensive jewelry, and first-class plane tickets using the corporate accounts. Warren had hired a shady private accountant to manipulate the numbers, but they had left a glaring digital footprint. They were writing off Brianna's diamond tennis bracelets and international vacations as legitimate corporate marketing expenses. The Internal Revenue Service does not look kindly on wealthy individuals using fake businesses to avoid paying federal taxes. The mandatory prison sentences for this specific type of corporate fraud were severe and unforgiving. By legally registering herself as the chief executive officer of the lifestyle brand, Brianna had made herself entirely liable for every single fraudulent tax return filed under her name. I cross-referenced the final property deed Brianna had so proudly shoved in my face earlier that evening. Apex Horizon Properties, LLC. I traced the routing number from that specific real estate transaction straight back to the Cayman Islands account. By officially signing that property deed, Brianna had directly linked herself to an international money laundering scheme. She thought she was securing her status as a wealthy elite, but she had actually just handed federal prosecutors the exact physical evidence they needed to charge her as a direct accessory to her father's crimes. Ignorance of the law is not a valid defense in federal court, especially when your signature is written in bold black ink at the bottom of a multi-million-dollar fraudulent real estate transfer. She was going to lose everything she thought she owned before the holiday weekend was even over. I leaned back in my leather chair staring at the 3 glowing monitors. The sheer scale of his deception was staggering. Warren had spent 2 decades stealing my future to fund his own pathetic illusions of grandeur. He had manipulated my mother into turning against me, using his stolen financial leverage to control her every move. He had weaponized his stolen wealth to ensure my stepsister always felt vastly superior to me. He had physically assaulted me tonight simply because I dared to sit at a table completely paid for by my own murdered inheritance. And he had done it all while calling me a glorified calculator. He truly believed my career was just a boring desk job. He had absolutely no idea that my desk was actually a highly weaponized digital command center, capable of dismantling his entire life from 40 stories above the city. I had played my part perfectly. I had let them mock my clothes and my quiet demeanor. I had allowed them to believe they held all the absolute power in the family dynamic. Because in the world of high-stakes financial investigations, the absolute greatest advantage you can ever have is being completely underestimated by your target. While they were busy drinking imported champagne and buying luxury sports cars, I was quietly building a federal guillotine perfectly positioned right above their oblivious heads. All the pieces were now fully assembled. The forged signatures, the illegal wire transfers, the fake tax returns, and the fraudulent property deeds were all compiled into a single devastating digital package. The meticulous investigation phase of my life was officially over. It was finally time for the execution. I typed the direct encrypted email addresses for Special Agent Davis at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division, and Director Mitchell at the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Unit. I had worked alongside both of these men on massive corporate embezzlement cases in the past. They knew my professional work ethic intimately. They knew that if I submitted a formal dossier, it was already a guaranteed conviction wrapped in a neat digital bow. Over the past 4 weeks, I had quietly fed them anonymous verified breadcrumbs regarding a massive money laundering operation operating right under their noses in the Atlanta area. I had carefully built their appetite. Tonight, I was giving them the entire feast. I attached the massive compressed file containing the master dossier. The progress bar loaded slowly, heavily burdened by thousands of pages of irrefutable digital evidence. I typed a brief, highly professional message outlining the exact contents, officially identifying Warren as the primary target, and explicitly listing Brianna as an active co-conspirator. I took a deep breath, feeling the agonizing weight of the last 20 years pressing against my chest. I thought about the heavy mahogany chair being violently yanked out from under me just hours ago. I thought about the arrogant laughter echoing through the dining room. Then I pressed the enter key. A small green confirmation window flashed across the center screen, indicating the message was successfully delivered and securely decrypted on the federal servers. The United States government was now officially in possession of Warren's complete criminal history. But I could not afford to stop there. The federal authorities would take a few hours to process the massive dossier, wake up a federal magistrate, and mobilize their field agents for a tactical strike. I needed an immediate, absolute financial blockade to ensure Warren could not move a single dime, hide a single asset, or flee the country the moment he suspected something was wrong. I shifted my attention to the left monitor and logged into the secure federal court digital portal. 2 days prior, a federal judge had reviewed my preliminary evidence in a highly classified closed-door session. Based on the overwhelming proof of stolen funds, the judge had pre-approved a sweeping emergency asset freeze injunction. It was sitting dormant in the system, waiting for my direct digital authorization to take effect. I typed in my unique investigator credentials, followed by my digital signature. I navigated to the specific legal order targeting every single bank account, holding company, investment portfolio, and offshore trust tied to Warren, Yvonne, Brianna, and Andre. I hovered my mouse cursor over the final execute command. With a single deliberate click, I initiated the total financial paralysis of my entire toxic family. The impact of that single digital click was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. At that exact moment, global banking algorithms and domestic clearinghouses received the priority federal directive. The offshore accounts hidden in the Cayman Islands were immediately locked down by international compliance protocols. Warren's primary checking and savings accounts at his elite private bank were frozen solid. The corporate business accounts for Brianna's luxury lifestyle brand were instantly suspended, rendering her platinum corporate credit cards completely useless pieces of plastic. Even the automated clearinghouse payments scheduled for the following morning, including the massive monthly installment for Andre's beloved high-performance Porsche, were immediately and permanently blocked. If any of them tried to buy a single cup of coffee tomorrow morning, their transactions would be aggressively declined. Their entire liquid reality was completely erased in a fraction of a second. Next, I moved to destroy his carefully curated social and professional reputation. Warren had built his entire fragile ego on being perceived as a brilliant, respected real estate mogul. He relied heavily on a network of high-net-worth private investors from his exclusive country club to fund his massive commercial projects. I opened my automated mailing server and loaded a pre-written whistleblower email. I attached a heavily redacted version of the financial audit, completely removing my personal identifying information, but clearly detailing exactly how Warren had been using fake shell companies to artificially inflate his property portfolio and misappropriate investor funds. I loaded the email addresses of his 20 top private investors. These were ruthless businessmen who did not tolerate being lied to and who absolutely despised losing their capital. I scheduled the batch of secure emails to hit their private inboxes at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. When these men woke up and checked their phones, their immediate reaction would not be to call Warren for a friendly chat. Their immediate reaction would be to call their aggressive corporate lawyers, pull their funding, and demand a full forensic investigation into every single dollar they had ever given him. Warren was going to become a complete social pariah in his own elite circles before he even poured his morning coffee. The final nail in the coffin was the house itself. That massive, gaudy, heavily mortgaged McMansion was the ultimate physical symbol of his dominance over me. He had literally pulled a chair out from under me in that exact house, claiming I did not belong at the head of the table. I opened a direct encrypted communication channel to the senior risk management officer at the elite private bank that held the multi-million-dollar mortgage on that sprawling suburban estate. Because of my high-level position in the risk management industry, I had a direct line to the executives who actually controlled the capital. I sent a highly detailed verified report outlining the exact fraudulent collateral Warren had used to secure that specific residential mortgage. Standard luxury mortgage contracts contain very strict zero-tolerance clauses regarding federal investigations and asset forfeiture. By providing the bank with undeniable legal proof that the collateral was entirely composed of stolen trust fund money, I legally triggered an immediate and irreversible default clause. The bank would not wait for a lengthy trial to protect their investment. They would initiate emergency foreclosure proceedings the absolute second their legal team reviewed the documents in the morning. The massive estate he was currently sleeping in no longer belonged to him. I sat back in my heavy, ergonomic leather chair, releasing a long, slow exhale that seemed to carry 20 years of suppressed anger out of my lungs. The 3 large monitors glowed brightly in the dark room, displaying a neat row of green confirmation checkmarks across the screens. The federal emails were sent and received. The assets were completely and legally frozen. The whistleblower alerts were locked, loaded, and counting down. The financial dominoes were officially in motion, and there was absolutely no force on earth, not even Warren's massive ego, that could stop them from falling. I reached for my crystal glass of sparkling water and took a long, refreshing drink. The silence of my penthouse was absolute perfection. I swiveled my chair around to face the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering, quiet skyline of downtown Atlanta. Somewhere out there in the dark, affluent suburbs, my stepfather was likely sleeping soundly in his massive custom bed. My mother was probably resting peacefully, completely ignorant of the devastating nightmare waiting for her at sunrise. Brianna was dreaming about her fake luxury empire, and Andre was likely dreaming about driving his stolen sports car around the city. They had all gone to sleep believing they were untouchable royalty. They had gone to sleep believing they had successfully put the pathetic family scapegoat back in her proper place. They had absolutely no idea that while they were resting comfortably, I had systematically dismantled every single aspect of their privileged existence. The financial execution was completely flawless. I had taken away the only thing they actually cared about in this world. Now all I had to do was go to sleep, wake up on Christmas morning, and wait for my phone to start ringing. I woke up to the soft, natural sunlight streaming freely through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my bedroom. I had not set an alarm. For the first time in my entire adult life, my body woke up naturally, completely free from the heavy, suffocating dread that usually accompanied a family holiday. I stretched my arms over my head, feeling the luxurious high thread count cotton sheets against my skin. The penthouse was entirely silent. There was no sound of slamming doors, no heavy aggressive footsteps echoing down the hallway, and absolutely no raised voices demanding immediate attention. For the past 20 years, Christmas morning in that suburban mansion was nothing short of a highly choreographed emotional nightmare. My mother Yvonne would be awake by 5 in the morning, frantically barking orders at the private catering staff, desperately trying to make sure every single detail of the breakfast spread was absolutely perfect before Warren woke up. If the imported coffee was slightly too cold, or if the expensive pastries were not arranged to his exact liking, Warren would throw a massive verbal tantrum, ruining the entire day before we even opened a single gift. We all had to walk on eggshells, forcing tight, unnatural smiles simply to appease the fragile ego of a tyrant. But this morning, sitting up in my custom king-sized bed, 40 stories above the quiet streets of downtown Atlanta, I felt completely untouchable. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress and let my bare feet rest against the heated, polished concrete floor. The ambient temperature of the apartment was absolutely perfect. I grabbed my thick silk robe from the end of the bed, wrapped it tightly around my shoulders, and tied the belt at my waist. I walked out of my bedroom and down the short hallway into the massive open-concept kitchen. The skyline view was stunning in the crisp winter daylight. The city below was still asleep, enjoying the peaceful quiet of the holiday. I walked over to my kitchen island and began my morning ritual. I did not rush. I had absolutely nowhere to be and no one to report to. I reached into the dark wooden cabinet and pulled out a bag of premium artisanal coffee beans I had imported from a small independent farm in Colombia. I carefully measured the exact amount of beans using a digital scale, pouring them into my high-end burr grinder. The sharp mechanical whir of the grinder broke the silence of the apartment, a deeply comforting sound that signaled the start of my day. I transferred the freshly ground coffee into a ceramic pour-over dripper and set my electric gooseneck kettle to exactly 205 degrees. As I waited for the water to heat up, I leaned against the cold white marble countertop and looked out at the city. I felt an incredible, profound sense of lightness in my chest. The massive, heavy boulder I had been carrying on my back since I was 15 years old was completely gone. I was no longer the tragic victim of a stolen inheritance. I was no longer the emotional punching bag for a family of parasites. I had completely leveled the playing field, and I had done it using my own intelligence, my own patience, and my own professional expertise. The kettle clicked, indicating the water had reached the perfect temperature. I picked it up and began slowly pouring the hot water over the fresh coffee grounds in tight concentric circles. I watched the grounds bloom, releasing a rich, earthy aroma that instantly filled the kitchen. I focused entirely on the simple, methodical process of brewing the perfect cup of coffee. I let the hot liquid drip slowly into my favorite heavy ceramic mug. Once the pour-over was complete, I discarded the filter and picked up my warm mug. I held it with both hands, letting the heat radiate into my palms. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The coffee was rich, complex, and absolutely perfect. I turned my body around and leaned my lower back against the marble island facing the sprawling living room. Sitting perfectly centered on the sleek glass coffee table right where I had left it the night before was my cell phone. It was placed face down. I had intentionally put it on silent before I went to sleep. I knew the exact timeline of the financial systems. I knew the offshore accounts would freeze at midnight. I knew the automated alerts regarding the rejected mortgage payments would hit Warren's email at dawn. I knew the whistleblower emails would land in the private inboxes of his top investors precisely at 6 in the morning. I had designed the entire digital strike to completely detonate while I was sound asleep. I took another long sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor. Then I slowly pushed myself off the kitchen counter and walked across the living room rug toward the glass table. My heart rate did not spike. My hands did not tremble. I was completely devoid of any anxiety. I simply felt a deep clinical curiosity about exactly how hard the reality had hit them. I reached down with my free hand and picked up the device. The cool metal chassis felt heavy in my palm. I smoothly turned the phone over and tapped the dark glass screen with my thumb. The screen instantly illuminated, bathing my face in a bright, harsh glow. The sheer volume of notifications stacked on the lock screen was absolutely staggering. The digital alert banners were completely overflowing, stacked so tightly together they formed a solid wall of panicked text. Right at the very top of the screen, displayed in bold red digits, was the final tally of the morning chaos. 99 missed calls. The notification system had actually maxed out its display limit. The number simply sat at 99 plus, refusing to calculate the exact total beyond that point. I slowly scrolled down the massive list, breaking down the precise origin of the absolute hysteria that was currently unfolding miles away in that fraudulent suburban mansion. 40 missed calls from Warren. His calls had started exactly at 7 in the morning. At first, they were spaced out every 10 minutes, indicating initial frustration and confusion. He probably thought it was a simple banking error. But by 8 o'clock, the calls were coming in back-to-back rapid-fire assaults on my voicemail system. The gaps between the missed calls vanished entirely, indicating a complete total loss of emotional control. 30 missed calls from my mother, Yvonne. Her barrage started shortly after Warren's. I could easily picture the scene. Warren pacing furiously through the grand foyer, screaming at the top of his lungs, throwing objects against the imported wallpaper, while Yvonne desperately tried to call me to beg for an explanation. She was likely hiding in one of the guest bathrooms, terrified of her husband's sudden violent rage, completely unable to understand why her platinum credit cards were suddenly being declined by her personal shoppers. 29 missed calls from Brianna. Her panic was the latest addition to the digital storm, starting right around 8:30. Her timeline made perfect sense. She usually slept in on holidays, letting the catering staff prepare her late morning brunch, but she must have been violently awakened by the chaos echoing through the house. Or more likely, she had woken up and tried to check the daily balances on her corporate lifestyle brand accounts, only to find that she was locked out of the banking portals completely, and her multi-million-dollar fake company was officially frozen. I stopped scrolling and simply stared at the massive wall of notifications. Below the missed calls were dozens of text messages previewing on the lock screen. They read like a real-time transcript of a sinking ship. A text from Warren sent at 7:15 read, "Call me immediately, my private banker is refusing to authorize my transfers." A text from Brianna sent at 8:40 read, "Camille, what did you do to my accounts? The dealership just called Andre and said his payment bounced." A text from Yvonne sent at 8:55 read, "Please pick up the phone. Camille Warren is tearing his office apart and saying the FBI just froze his assets. Tell me this is a mistake." It was not a mistake. It was a perfectly executed financial execution. The artificial bubble they had lived in for 2 decades had violently burst, showering them in the devastating reality of their own actions. I took another sip of my coffee, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. The absolute silence of my penthouse was a stark, beautiful contrast to the deafening panic radiating from the screen in my hand. I walked over to my custom leather sofa and sat down, crossing my legs comfortably. I unlocked the phone, bypassing the wall of panicked text messages and navigating directly to my visual voicemail application. The little red notification bubble hovering over the phone icon displayed a massive number. I had purposely let every single one of their desperate calls roll straight to voicemail. I wanted them to speak to a machine. I wanted them to scream their frustrations into the absolute void while I slept peacefully. Now I was wide awake, well-rested, and fully prepared to listen to the symphony of their destruction. I rested my coffee mug on my knee and tapped the very first voicemail left by Warren, eagerly waiting to hear the exact moment his massive, arrogant ego began to permanently fracture. I tapped the play icon on the very first voicemail left at exactly 8 in the morning. The audio began with a sharp rustling sound, followed by the unmistakable background noise of the exclusive country club dining room. I could hear the faint clinking of expensive silverware and the low murmur of wealthy patrons enjoying their traditional Christmas morning breakfast. Then Warren's voice came through the speaker. He was trying incredibly hard to maintain his authoritative tone, but I could hear the tight, shallow breathing of a man who had just been deeply embarrassed in public. "Camille, pick up the phone right now," he demanded, his voice a harsh, whispered hiss. "I am standing at the front desk of the club and my black card was just declined." The manager actually had the audacity to cut it in half right in front of the board members. "I just tried to log into the primary business accounts and everything is completely locked out." "Did you mess with the accounting software before you left last night?" "I know you were angry, but this is not a game. You are going to fix this computer glitch immediately, or I swear I will have you fired from your little desk job by tomorrow morning. Call me back the second you get this." The voicemail ended with an aggressive click. I smiled, taking another sip of my coffee. It was fascinating to hear how his massive ego completely blinded him to reality. He honestly believed his entire financial empire collapsing was just a temporary computer glitch caused by a disgruntled stepdaughter. He still thought he held all the power. He still believed he could threaten my career. He had absolutely no idea that the federal authorities had already seized those accounts, and the country club manager was simply the very first person to treat him like the broke criminal he actually was. I skipped past the next dozen voicemails from my mother, which were mostly just her crying and begging me to fix whatever Warren was yelling about. I wanted to hear the exact moment the collateral damage hit the golden child. I scrolled down to a voicemail from Brianna, timestamped at exactly 9:30 in the morning. I pressed play and leaned back against the leather sofa. The contrast was immediate and jarring. There was no attempt at composure. Brianna was absolutely hysterical. Her voice was shrill, broken by heavy, hyperventilating sobs. In the background, I could clearly hear the loud, rumbling idle of a heavy-duty diesel engine and the sharp, mechanical clanking of metal chains. "Camille, answer your phone!" she screamed into the receiver, the sheer panic vibrating through the speaker. "What did you do?" "There is a massive tow truck sitting in my driveway right now. They are taking Andre's car. The neighbors are all standing on their front lawns watching us. Andre is outside screaming at the driver, but the guy has a police escort. He told Andre the title transfer was flagged for federal asset forfeiture, and the holding company accounts are totally frozen." "What holding company, Camille? What is happening?" "Warren is not answering his phone and my platinum cards are completely dead. Make it stop right now. Tell them to drop the car. You are ruining my life." I listened to the sound of Andre screaming profanities in the background, completely powerless, as the repo men dragged his beloved high-performance sports car onto the flatbed truck. The illusion of his immense success was being violently stripped away in broad daylight, right in front of his wealthy suburban neighbors. Brianna cared more about the public embarrassment than she did about the actual vehicle. Her entire identity was built on appearing flawless to the outside world, and now she was the main spectacle of a neighborhood scandal on Christmas morning. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. She had happily worn jewelry bought with my stolen inheritance. Now she was paying the ultimate social price. The progression of their terror was a beautiful thing to witness. I let the visual voicemail list scroll down past another wave of frantic calls arriving at the climax of the morning panic. I tapped on a voicemail from Warren, time-stamped at 10:45. The background noise of the country club was completely gone. There was no rustling, no ambient sound of a busy household. There was only dead, heavy silence followed by the sound of Warren taking deep, ragged breaths. When he finally spoke, the arrogant, commanding patriarch from the dining room was entirely dead. His voice was a raw, unhinged roar of pure terror. "You little treacherous snake!" he screamed, the audio peaking and distorting from the sheer volume of his rage. "The bank just called me. The senior vice president called me on his private cell phone on Christmas morning. They are initiating immediate foreclosure on the house. They said the mortgage collateral was flagged as fraudulent by a federal task force. They said the words, 'Federal Task Force Camille.'" He paused, panting heavily into the microphone. I could practically see the veins bulging in his neck. The pieces had finally clicked together in his mind. He finally understood the cold, confident smile I gave him before I walked out the door. He understood exactly what my parting words had meant. "I know this was you," he continued, his voice shaking violently. "You set me up. You stole my files. I will destroy you for this. I will hire the best lawyers in the state, and I will bury you so deep you will never see the light of day. You have absolutely no idea who you are messing with. I am going to ruin you. You hear me? I will take everything you love, and I will crush it." The voicemail cut off abruptly, likely because he had thrown his phone against a wall in a blind fit of absolute desperation. The empty threats echoed in the quiet space of my living room, floating harmlessly through the air before fading away completely. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the magnitude of his breakdown. He was promising to hire the best lawyers in the state, completely ignoring the fact that his bank accounts were entirely frozen. He could not even afford to hire a traffic court attorney right now, let alone a high-powered corporate defense team. He was threatening to ruin my life while actively standing inside a multi-million-dollar mansion that he no longer legally possessed. His entire existence had been instantly reduced to empty, screaming threats. The satisfaction I felt was not just vindication. It was the deep, absolute peace of knowing that justice had been surgically delivered. For 20 years, he had used his financial leverage to trap my mother, to elevate his terrible daughter, and to systematically humiliate me. He had used money as a weapon to control every single aspect of our family dynamic. By simply removing that money, I had completely disarmed him. He was nothing but a terrified old man shouting into a phone. I placed my empty coffee mug down on the glass table. The notification storm on my phone had finally begun to slow down. The reality of their situation had firmly set in, and the panicked rapid-fire calling had transitioned into a heavy, defeated silence. They were finally beginning to realize that absolutely nothing they did or said could stop the massive legal avalanche coming for them. But I knew the silence would not last long. Warren's ego would demand one final confrontation. He needed someone to blame, and he needed to hear my voice to truly understand the depth of his defeat. I watched the dark screen of my phone, resting my hands calmly in my lap. I was fully prepared for the final interaction. The 100th call was coming, and I was finally ready to answer it. I did not have to wait long. Less than 2 minutes after his unhinged voicemail ended, the dark glass screen of my phone illuminated once again. The device vibrated violently against the smooth surface of the coffee table, buzzing with frantic, desperate energy. The caller identification displayed Warren's name in bold white letters. This was it. The absolute milestone of his total destruction. The 100th missed call was not going to be missed at all. I leaned forward, picked up the phone, and swiped the green icon across the screen. I brought the speaker to my ear and leaned back comfortably against the leather sofa. I did not say hello. I did not offer a polite morning greeting. I did not say a single word. I simply held the phone to my ear and let the open line broadcast the absolute perfect peace of my environment directly into his chaotic nightmare. For the first few seconds, all I could hear was the sound of a grown man struggling to process oxygen. Warren was hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, ragged, panicked gasps. The background noise indicated he was no longer at the country club. He was pacing furiously, echoing off the hard surfaces of the grand foyer in the mansion. When he finally realized the line was open and I was actually listening to him, his fragile composure completely shattered. "Camille, what did you do to my accounts?" he demanded, his voice completely stripped of its usual deep, booming authority. It sounded thin, desperate, and incredibly high-pitched. "I am locked out of everything. The private bank is foreclosing on the house. My top investors are sending me insane emails threatening to send the authorities to my property. Fix this right now. Call whoever you called and tell them it was a massive computer mistake, or I am going to call the police and have you arrested for cyberterrorism." I let him finish his pathetic, frantic rant. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch, just long enough to make him incredibly uncomfortable. Cyber terrorism, Warren? I asked, my tone conversational and incredibly light. You really think I hacked into your little bank accounts like some bored teenager in a basement? You really think a simple computer glitch triggers a senior vice president to call you on his private cell phone on a holiday morning to foreclose on a multi-million-dollar property? Then what did you do? He screamed, the sheer panic fully taking over his vocal cords. I took a deep breath and began the systematic surgical deconstruction of his entire fake reality. I did exactly what you always mocked me for doing, Warren. I crunched the numbers. For the last 36 months, I have been conducting a highly classified forensic financial audit of your entire real estate empire. I know absolutely everything. I know about the original forged signature you used to steal my biological father's trust fund 2 decades ago. I know about the corrupt local notary public you bribed to stamp the documents. I have his full confession on a recorded line. I paused, letting the weight of my words crush him before continuing. I know exactly how much stolen money you funneled through Apex Holdings to buy Andre's little high-performance sports car. And I know all about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands you used to wash the funds before dropping them into the corporate accounts of Brianna's fraudulent lifestyle brand. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute and profound. He stopped breathing entirely. The sudden, terrifying realization that I knew the exact legal names of his highly illegal shell companies hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He had spent years believing he was an untouchable criminal mastermind, and in less than 60 seconds, I had completely undressed his entire operation. "You are lying," he whispered, but there was absolutely no conviction in his voice. He sounded like a frightened child. "You cannot possibly know about those offshore accounts. They are completely encrypted. They are untraceable. Nothing is encrypted when you have federal clearance." "Warren," I replied smoothly, "I am a senior financial fraud investigator. I build massive federal indictments against corporate criminals for a living. You called me a glorified calculator last night. You told me I just sit at a boring desk. You had absolutely no idea that my desk is a secure terminal connected directly to global financial databases. I did not just discover your little money laundering operation, Warren. I packaged it. I documented every single wire transfer, every fake tax return, and every forged property deed." He let out a low, guttural sound that was halfway between a sob and a gasp. I could hear his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the marble floor as his knees likely gave out. "And last night, while you were sleeping comfortably in a house you stole from me, I sent that entire master dossier directly to my contacts at the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Unit." The FBI, he choked out the acronym, catching painfully in his dry throat. "Camille, please. You have to stop this." "There is no please, Warren." I continued, cutting off his pathetic attempt at begging. "That judge-approved injunction that froze your bank accounts at midnight was just the beginning. Your private investors received a fully documented whistleblower report at 6 o'clock this morning. They know you stole their venture capital to cover the massive daily losses from Brianna's fake business. They are already calling their aggressive corporate lawyers. You have zero liquid capital. You have no valid property. You cannot even afford to buy a tank of gas to run away." He started to frantically backpedal his survival instincts, overriding any remaining shred of family loyalty. He was completely cornered, and just like a desperate rat, he immediately turned on his own blood to save himself. "Camille, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice shaking violently. "I will give it all back. I will sign the trust fund back over to you today. And it was not just me. You have to believe me. Your mother knew about the money. Yvonne knew I was moving the funds from the very beginning. She signed the power of attorney. And Brianna is the one spending all the cash. She is the one racking up the massive corporate credit card debt. You need to tell the federal agents that they were heavily involved. I can cooperate with the authorities, Camille. I can give them everything they need to lock up Brianna and your mother. Just tell them to let me go." I felt a deep, profound wave of absolute disgust roll through my stomach. The very second his own freedom was threatened, he immediately offered to sacrifice his beloved golden child and his incredibly loyal wife. He was willing to throw the women he claimed to love into a federal prison just to save his own pathetic skin. He truly was a monster devoid of any genuine human emotion. "You do not need to worry about offering them up to the federal prosecutors, Warren," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, unyielding temperature. "I already took care of that for you." Brianna proudly signed the property deed for that luxury penthouse last night. She officially and legally accepted stolen funds through Apex Horizon Properties. She is now a documented active accessory to federal wire fraud and international tax evasion, and Yvonne was completely complicit from day one. You are all going down together. I made absolutely sure of that. The federal warrants have already been signed by a judge. You cannot do this to your own family, Camille. He begged loudly, openly weeping into the receiver. We gave you a home. We put a roof over your head. We invited you to our table. You cannot destroy us like this. I smiled, looking out over the beautiful, peaceful city skyline bathed in the bright morning sunlight. I felt the final heavy chain of my past snap completely cleanly, breaking my ties to these toxic parasites forever. You told me the seat at the head of the table was for your real daughter, Warren. So I took the table, and the house and the bank accounts. Before he could utter another single pathetic word, before he could scream or beg or threaten me again, I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. The call disconnected instantly, plunging my living room back into perfect, absolute silence. I set my phone down on the glass coffee table and watched the screen turn black. I knew Warren would immediately try to call back, to scream more empty threats or offer more pathetic bargains, so I calmly opened my settings and permanently blocked his number. I did the exact same thing for my mother and Brianna. The time for talking was completely over. I stood up from the leather sofa and walked back to my master bedroom. It was time to witness the grand finale in person. I dressed with absolute precision. I chose a sharp-tailored dark charcoal suit over a crisp white blouse, pairing it with my heavy wool trench coat and black leather gloves. I wanted to look exactly like the professional senior investigator that Warren had so foolishly underestimated for years. I grabbed my car keys and rode the private elevator down to the underground garage. The drive from downtown Atlanta back to the affluent suburbs was incredibly peaceful. The bright Christmas morning sun illuminated the empty highways, and I listened to the steady hum of my engine, feeling completely relaxed. As I turned onto the familiar tree-lined streets of Warren's exclusive neighborhood, I immediately noticed the stark contrast between the quiet holiday morning and the absolute chaos I knew was waiting for me. The manicured lawns and massive brick colonials looked perfectly serene, but as I approached Warren Street, I glanced into my rearview mirror. Trailing exactly 3 car lengths behind me was a tight convoy of 3 unmarked black sport utility vehicles. They were driving in perfect unison, their heavily tinted windows hiding the occupants inside. I recognized the tactical formation immediately. I slowed my car down, allowing the federal convoy to close the gap as we approached the massive wrought iron gates of the estate. The gates were already wide open. The smart home security system required a massive monthly subscription fee automatically drafted from one of Warren's primary corporate accounts. Because I had frozen that account at midnight, the security company had automatically suspended service, leaving the gates permanently unlocked. It was a poetic detail, perfectly paving the way for the authorities. I pulled onto the sweeping gravel driveway and parked my car near the large stone fountain in the center of the courtyard. The 3 black sport utility vehicles pulled in right behind me, instantly fanning out to completely block the driveway exit. They parked at strategic angles, ensuring absolutely no vehicle could leave the premises. I turned off my engine and stepped out into the crisp winter air, wrapping my trench coat tightly around myself. Before the federal agents could even open their doors, the heavy mahogany front doors of the mansion violently swung open. Warren burst out onto the front porch, and the sight of him was absolutely pathetic. The polished, arrogant patriarch from the night before was completely gone. He was wearing wrinkled gray sweatpants and a stained white undershirt, looking completely disheveled. His face was a dangerous shade of crimson, his eyes bloodshot and wide with unhinged, manic energy. He spotted me standing calmly next to my car and let out a guttural, animalistic roar. "You!" he screamed, his voice cracking from the strain. "I am going to kill you!" He lunged forward, storming down the wide stone steps of the porch with heavy, aggressive footfalls. He was completely blinded by his toxic rage, entirely oblivious to the three massive black vehicles idling directly behind me. He crossed the gravel driveway, his fists tightly clenched at his sides, fully intending to physically assault me right there in the front yard. He wanted to hurt me, to punish me for stripping away his fake power. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood my ground and watched the pathetic, violent man sprinting toward his own doom. Warren was exactly 10 feet away from me when the heavy, reinforced doors of the three black vehicles swung open in perfect unison. A dozen federal agents stepped out onto the gravel, their boots crunching loudly in the quiet morning air. They were fully geared up, wearing dark tactical vests with bright yellow lettering emblazoned across their chests and backs. FBI, IRS, Criminal Investigation. "Federal agents, stay exactly where you are," a loud, booming voice commanded, cutting through the cold air like a physical weapon. Warren stopped dead in his tracks. The physical transformation was incredibly satisfying to watch. The violent, unhinged predator vanished in a microsecond, instantly replaced by a terrified, trembling old man. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. His eyes darted frantically from the heavily armed agents to the flashing red and blue lights hidden in the grills of the vehicles, and then finally back to me. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sudden, devastating realization that I had not been bluffing. Special Agent Davis, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a strictly professional demeanor, walked forward from the lead vehicle. He was holding a thick, heavy stack of legal documents inside a clear plastic folder. He walked right past me, not breaking his professional protocol to acknowledge my presence, but I could see the tight, focused set of his jaw. We had worked on multiple high-profile cases together, and he knew exactly how satisfying this moment was for me. Warren Agent Davis said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "I am Special Agent Davis with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. We also have a federal judge-signed warrant to search this premises and seize all assets located on this property." Warren raised his trembling hands, stepping backward as two armed agents flanked him on either side. "There has been a mistake," he stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "I am a respected businessman. You have the wrong information. My stepdaughter, she is crazy. She set me up." Agent Davis did not even blink. "We have thousands of pages of encrypted routing numbers, offshore account ledgers, and forged property deeds that say otherwise, Warren. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." One of the agents grabbed Warren's arm firmly, spinning him around. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly across the driveway. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Warren slumped his shoulders, completely defeated, as the agent patted him down. He turned his head to look at me over his shoulder, tears of absolute terror streaming down his face. "You cannot do this to me, Camille," he sobbed, completely ignoring the federal agents. "I am your family. Please." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical closure. "I told you, Warren," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "You do not dictate who belongs at the table anymore." As the agents began to march him toward the back of the lead vehicle, the heavy front doors of the mansion burst open again. The commotion in the driveway had finally drawn out the rest of the toxic parasites hiding inside the house. My mother, Yvonne, Brianna, and Andre rushed out onto the porch, stopping dead in their tracks as they took in the unbelievable scene unfolding on their front lawn. Yvonne let out a piercing, horrified scream, covering her mouth with both hands as she watched her husband being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. Brianna looked absolutely completely lost, clutching her silk robe tightly around her body, staring at the bright yellow letters on the agents' vests. Andre stood completely frozen, his eyes wide, rapidly doing the mental math and realizing that his entire fake wealthy lifestyle was officially over. The federal raid had successfully breached the fortress. The arrogant king was locked in handcuffs, and the remaining court jesters were about to realize that the exact same federal net was currently closing tightly around their own necks. I stood perfectly still by my car, ready to watch the golden child and the weak enabler face the full brutal weight of the justice system. The bright morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across the gravel driveway as Agent Davis began to read Warren his Miranda rights. The words were methodical and unfeeling, bouncing off the stone facade of the mansion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Warren simply hung his head, his shoulders shaking with silent, terrified sobs, as the reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his arrogant ego. Standing on the porch, the rest of the family watched the scene unfold, with a mixture of absolute horror and dawning self-preservation. It only took a few seconds for the gravity of the situation to fully register with Andre. He looked past Warren, staring directly at the armed federal agents swarming his father-in-law's property. His eyes widened as his survival instincts violently kicked in. He knew the tow truck had already taken his beloved sports car, and now he was watching the absolute collapse of his only financial lifeline. Andre did not hesitate for a single second. He sprinted down the porch steps, his designer shoes slipping slightly on the gravel, waving his hands frantically in the air. "We had absolutely nothing to do with this," he screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Warren, who was standing handcuffed between two federal agents. "It was all him. We did not know the money was stolen. He is the one who set up the shell companies. He transferred the funds. We are completely innocent." Brianna, completely abandoning her usual composed, glamorous facade, scurried down the steps right behind her husband. She clutched her expensive silk robe tightly around her waist, looking at the federal agents with wide, terrified eyes. She did not even glance at her father, who was staring at them in absolute disbelief. "He is telling the truth!" Brianna cried out, her voice shrill and desperate. "I just launched my lifestyle brand. I am a legitimate entrepreneur. My father handled all the initial investments. I had absolutely no idea where the capital was coming from. Please, you cannot freeze my business accounts. I have vendors to pay. I am a victim here too." Warren lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes staring at his precious golden child and his hand-picked son-in-law. The betrayal was instantaneous and brutally public. For 20 years he had showered them with stolen wealth, protecting them, elevating them, and funding their extravagant delusions. And the very second his power evaporated, they threw him directly to the federal wolves without a single ounce of hesitation. The profound shock on his face was almost tragic, but it was entirely deserved. He had built his entire family on a foundation of greed and manipulation, and now he was reaping the exact harvest he had sown. Agent Davis simply held up a hand, silencing both Andre and Brianna with a single authoritative gesture. "If you are Brianna and Andre," he stated calmly, pulling a secondary document from his plastic folder, "we will be needing to speak with both of you regarding your signatures on multiple fraudulent corporate tax returns and the recent illegal transfer of a luxury penthouse property. Please step over to the secondary vehicle." The blood drained completely from Brianna's face. Her knees visibly buckled, and Andre had to grab her arm to keep her from collapsing onto the driveway. The realization that they were not just collateral damage, but active targets in the federal investigation hit them like a physical blow. They were quickly escorted away by two armed agents, their frantic protests falling on entirely deaf ears. While the agents secured Warren and detained Brianna and Andre, my mother Yvonne remained standing alone on the grand front porch. She looked small, fragile, and completely broken. She slowly walked down the stone steps, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as if trying to hold her shattering world together. She bypassed the federal agents and walked directly toward me, stopping just a few feet away from where I stood leaning against my car. "Camille," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. Tears were streaming freely down her perfectly made-up face, ruining her expensive foundation. "Please, you have to stop this. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you were just angry about last night." I looked at my mother, feeling a deep, profound sense of emptiness. There was no anger left. There was no sadness. There was only the cold, hard reality of the choices she had made. "I cannot stop a federal indictment, Yvonne," I said, my voice perfectly level. "The evidence is irrefutable. He stole millions of dollars. He forged documents. He built this entire life on a massive lie." "But we are family," she sobbed, reaching out a shaking hand toward my arm. I took a deliberate step backward, refusing to let her touch me. "You cannot do this to your own family." "What about me, Camille? What am I supposed to do? He is my husband. This is my home." She was still completely blind. Even now, watching her husband being loaded into the back of a federal vehicle, she was still trying to weaponize my empathy. She was still demanding that I sacrifice my own justice to maintain her illusion of comfort. "You told me I did not belong here, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, unyielding temperature. "You stood in the kitchen last night and defended the man who physically assaulted me. You told me to apologize to him. You told me I was ruining your perfect holiday." Yvonne squeezed her eyes shut, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. "I was just trying to keep the peace," she cried weakly. "Your peace was bought with my stolen future," I replied coldly. "And you were absolutely right last night. I do not belong in your family. But you were wrong about the house." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored trench coat and pulled out a crisp, heavy legal document. It was a formal eviction notice authorized and stamped by the exact same federal judge who had frozen the assets at midnight. I held the document out toward her. "Because the mortgage collateral was proven entirely fraudulent, the bank has officially seized the property," I explained, watching her eyes widen as she stared at the official seal on the paper. "However, because the original seed money used to purchase the land was traced directly back to my biological father's trust fund, the federal court has legally transferred the primary deed directly into my name as restitution." Yvonne gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in total denial. "That is impossible." "It is a matter of public record as of this morning," I stated flatly, shoving the document into her trembling hands. "I am the sole legal owner of this entire estate now, and as the legal owner I am formally serving you notice. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises." My mother stared down at the eviction notice, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled in the quiet morning air. She looked up at me, her eyes searching desperately for the quiet, obedient daughter she had manipulated for 2 decades. She was looking for the scapegoat who would eventually cave under the pressure of maternal guilt. But that girl was entirely dead. In her place stood a senior financial fraud investigator who had just successfully executed the absolute destruction of a massive criminal enterprise. I turned away from her, completely done with the conversation. I looked over at the lead federal vehicle just as the agents placed their hands on top of Warren's head, carefully guiding him into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut with a definitive metallic thud, sealing his fate. He would not be sleeping in a custom king-sized bed tonight. He would be sleeping on a thin cot in a federal holding cell. I opened the door to my car, sliding into the driver's seat. I did not look back at my mother crying on the gravel driveway. I did not look back at Brianna and Andre arguing frantically with the federal agents. I put the car in drive and slowly pulled out of the massive wrought iron gates, leaving the toxic ruins of my past entirely behind me. 6 months have passed since that freezing Christmas morning in the gravel driveway of the estate. The seasons have changed, and so has the entire landscape of my life. The federal justice system moves incredibly fast when they are handed a perfectly organized and heavily documented master dossier. Warren did not even make it to a full trial. When his expensive defense attorneys finally saw the absolute mountain of irrefutable digital evidence I had compiled against him, they immediately advised him to take a plea deal. He is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary. The man who used to scream at private caterers because his imported coffee was slightly too cold is now eating mass-produced meals on a metal tray surrounded by thick concrete walls. He has absolutely no power, no money, and no one to bully. I heard through the federal prosecutors that he tried to act like a wealthy patriarch inside the prison block during his first week, but the other inmates quickly reminded him that his fake status meant absolutely nothing behind bars. Brianna's spectacular downfall was equally satisfying to witness from a safe distance. The moment the federal agents froze her corporate accounts, her entire luxury lifestyle brand evaporated into thin air. Without my stolen inheritance to artificially prop up her failing business, her vendors immediately filed massive lawsuits for unpaid invoices. The federal prosecutors did not offer her a lenient deal either. She narrowly avoided actual prison time by agreeing to fully testify against her own father, but she was hit with crushing financial penalties and a permanent felony conviction for tax evasion. Her pristine social media image was completely destroyed overnight. Her millions of fake followers vanished, and the few real people left simply flooded her comment sections, mocking her fraudulent lifestyle. And just as I predicted, Andre did not stick around to help her rebuild. The absolute second, the federal agents towed his sports car and froze their joint accounts. His fake love completely vanished. He filed for divorce less than a week after the raid, desperately trying to legally distance himself from her massive criminal debt. Brianna is now living in a cheap weekly motel, trying to figure out how to survive without a stolen trust fund to pay her bills. My mother Yvonne faced the exact harsh reality she had been terrified of her entire life. She lost the massive suburban mansion, the country club memberships, and the platinum credit cards. Because she had knowingly signed the forged power of attorney documents 2 decades ago, the federal court stripped her of everything she thought she owned. She managed to avoid criminal charges by fully cooperating with the authorities, but she was left with absolutely nothing. She is currently living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. She works as a receptionist at a small, busy dental clinic just to afford her basic groceries. She has tried to contact me several times, sending desperate handwritten letters begging for financial forgiveness. I never open them. I just slide them directly into the paper shredder in my home office. She made her choice decades ago when she decided to protect a toxic monster instead of her own daughter. I am no longer obligated to save her from the consequences of her own terrible cowardice. As for me, I have fully reclaimed every single piece of my biological father's legacy. The federal court formally restored my trust fund, liquidating Warren's few remaining assets to replace the money he had stolen. I officially sold that massive toxic suburban mansion to a commercial developer who completely demolished it to build a new residential community. Watching the bulldozers tear down that formal dining room where I was so violently humiliated was the ultimate form of closure. My father's hard work is finally back in my hands exactly where he always intended it to be. Tonight the air is warm and the Atlanta skyline is glowing beautifully against the dark summer sky. I am standing on the massive glass balcony of my downtown penthouse holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. But this time, I am not surrounded by toxic parasites or cruel narcissists. Inside my beautiful apartment, my chosen family is gathered around the kitchen island, laughing loudly and sharing stories. They are my close friends, my brilliant colleagues, and the people who have stood by me long before they knew I was a wealthy heiress. They love and respect me for my mind, my loyalty, and my character. There is no fake hierarchy here. There is only genuine warmth and mutual support. I take a slow sip of my champagne, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. I look out at the sprawling city lights, feeling a profound, absolute sense of peace. The heavy burden of being the family scapegoat is completely gone forever. I am the architect of my own life now, and the foundation is entirely unbreakable. They say blood is thicker than water, but loyalty is thicker than both. Family is not determined by biology or legal documents. It is determined by the people who consistently choose to show up for you, to protect you, and to value your peace. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own mental health or your assets? How did you finally find the courage to cut the cord? Let me know your story in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of taking back control and finding your true worth. Until next time, remember that you never have to tolerate disrespect just because it comes from someone who shares your last name.